Well, good evening, and thank you so much for being here. It's really nice to have the class, regardless again of how many people are on. The class is a chance for us to connect and bring Torah into our week. So it's always a great opportunity for me personally to tune into the weekly Torah portion or whatever we're discussing, and to keep on the feeling of bringing Torah into our day. So first of all, the class is being recorded because there were several who had mentioned that they want to listen to it later who couldn't make it this week. So it will be recorded, and I hope it'll make it online. I'm working on slowly getting the last couple of weeks onto the YouTube channel. So hopefully this one will make it on as well. And all the past classes, besides for the last several weeks, are online as well. So we'll be able to do that. So first of all, happy post Hanukkah. If I could just say, it's good to get back into the swing of things after a holiday. But I feel like there are so many beautiful lessons and beautiful, meaningful experiences that we have during the holiday of Hanukkah that we can tap into and connect with going forward for the rest of the year. So I hope that we can take the idea of bringing light and bringing joy into our everyday, every moment, which is a very powerful lesson from the Hanukkah story. So on that note, we're going to be zooming into the Torah portion of this week. The series that we've been doing this last while has been focusing on the stories of the weekly Torah portion, but not just on a surface level, but more zooming into ideas that we can learn a valuable lesson and incorporate into our own lives so that the Torah portion and the stories that are in the Torah can be applicable as more than just a history and something that happened in the past, but rather as a blueprint and a guide for us to live our lives so that we can be actually living the life of the story of the Parsha being the Torah portion. So let's get right into it. This week in the Torah portion, it is Parshat Vayigash. Now, Parshat Vayigash is actually the second to last Torah portion in the first book of the Torah. We are in the book of Genesis, Bereshit, and this is the second to last portion in this book. So we're getting close to the end of the first section of the story of the Torah, which is in the first book of the 5 books of the Torah, the book of Bereshit. And the characters that we have in this story are very, very complex, unique people. And we're learning about the story of Joseph. Now, the end of last Torah portion, we did not have a class last week, but if anyone's familiar with any part of the story, the Torah portion last week ended with the 11 tribes together in Pharaoh's palace in Egypt. Now, I say 11 tribes, even though there were 12, because Binyamin, the youngest of the tribes, was not in the palace at that time. He had stayed back with his father Jacob. And we see that 10 of the brothers are standing in the palace and they are coming to get food from the king in Egypt. What they don't know is that the king of Egypt, second in command to Pharaoh himself, is actually their brother Joseph. And the chain of events that had led their brother Joseph, Jacob's favorite son, the pride and joy of Yaakov Avinu, to end up in Egypt was a super dramatic story, a very tragic chain of events. His brothers were jealous of him. They wanted to kill him. They threw him into a pit. They ended up selling him as a slave, and he ended up going down to Egypt. He lived there as a slave for a while. He ended up a prisoner there, and eventually he was taken out of prison because he was able to interpret dreams. He interpreted Pharaoh's dream, and he ends up becoming the viceroy of Egypt. And it's so many years later, and the brothers are now at the mercy of their brother Joseph, unbeknown to them. They didn't know, they didn't recognize him. He had been a young boy when he had been taken down to Egypt, and now he's a grown man with a family of his own. And the tables are turned, because while as a young boy, Joseph had been tormented by his brothers, now the tribes are living in the land of Canaan, which is the land of Israel. There's a famine. The only country that has food is Egypt. And Joseph is in charge of the storehouses. So if they want food, they need Joseph to grant them permission to take food. And they are at his mercy now. And if you can imagine any person whose entire life has been a series of tragedies and a series of challenges, one after the next, because of what his own brothers did to him, now's his chance. Now he can torment them. He can give them a taste of their own medicine. He can really make them pay. The power and control is completely in his domain. And yet, at the beginning of the Torah portion, we see the reunion of Joseph and his brothers as he reveals himself to them and he tells them who he actually is. I think it is one of the most emotional and dramatic scenes in the book of Bereshit, definitely. If you can imagine Joseph, who is now the viceroy of Egypt, and he sends all of the servants out of the room. He wants to be alone with his brothers. They don't know why they are being granted this private audience with the king of Egypt. But then he reveals himself and he tells them, Ani Yosef, I am Joseph. And the next words that come out of his mouth are so heartbreaking and yet so beautiful. He says, Ha'od avi chai, is my father still alive? He didn't even know if his own father was still alive. And that's when he finds out that, in fact, yes, his father is alive. And he had spent the last 20-something years mourning the loss of his beloved child. So if you can imagine the emotion that was felt in the room at that time, they were crying, they were reconnecting. The brothers are so remorseful for what they had done to Joseph. They feel so bad for the fact that as younger, almost adults, the brothers were adults. He was the second youngest in the family, so he was 17. They were older than him, so they were already adults, and they had truly made his life a misery and had caused a chain of reactions that really and truly led Joseph to have challenges beyond comparison in his life. Like we said, living as a slave, living as a prisoner, and even living as viceroy of Egypt. For a person who's trying to hold on to their faith, for a son of Jacob, for the son of our patriarchs, one of the tribes, to have to live in the immorality and the wickedness and the idol worship that was the environment of Pharaoh's palace, in order to remain strong, it was an enormous challenge and a very, very big tragedy for him, even though, it seems like he had such an important role to play. But the reality is that it was very, very challenging for him. It was very hard for him to retain his faith and not become influenced negatively by his surroundings. So his entire life was devastated, so to speak, by what they had caused, and they feel terrible for it. And yet not once does he make them feel bad about it. Not once does he make them feel that it was even their fault. His entire attitude towards his brothers and towards his life is that this was God's plan all along. I became who I am in Egypt. The series of events that shaped my life is all part of what God had intended for me. In fact, later on in the story coming up in the upcoming Torah portion of next week, after Jacob passes away, which again, we're not saying the story of the Torah portion in chronological order because we're focusing on ideas here. So fast forward ahead a little bit when Jacob passes away and the brothers are now worried that perhaps now Yosef will take revenge. Maybe he was only being nice previously because he didn't want to hurt his father by being mean to his other children. And Yosef's words to his brothers are, am I in the place of God? Can I punish you for doing something bad to me? Is that my place? Now, on a human level, we would say, yes, you did something bad to me. Now you're in a position to punish us. Yeah, you're going to punish us. Isn't that the most logical human thing to want to do? But his whole mindset was different. His whole outlook on life was everything that happens to me is really coming from God. And every single step that my life has made me take is really ordained by God. So if anyone should be punishing you, it's God. Because God is the one who creates the series of events that takes place in a person's life. And everything is for an exact purpose and exact reason. Excuse me. So the ideas that we have from Yosef's reaction upon the reunion with his brothers is so powerful and teaches us such an incredible lesson about understanding challenges in our lives, understanding people who pose a challenge in our lives. And I want to differentiate for a moment the idea that we do not have to live our lives as pushovers and say, well, if someone is acting terribly to me, that's fine. That's what God wants. God wants us to be strong and healthy and emotionally stable. And that sometimes means cutting toxic people out of our life. But in general, when we encounter challenges that are caused by difficult people, the Torah portion of this week and the life of Yosef gives us this blueprint that we can follow on how we can behave and what our attitude towards such people can actually be. So when we encounter difficulties and we encounter difficult people, or even people who have caused challenges in our lives, we can look at it in retrospect and say, as soon as I have the ability, I'm definitely going to get back at them. It's a very natural response, but it's a very unhealthy way of living, because then the negativity just festers. Yosef could have lived his entire life in Egypt waiting for the moment that he could get back on his brothers. And we probably would understand that. Let's be real. We all have that feeling sometimes of, oh, as soon as I can, I'm going to get back at that person. Or as soon as I have the upper hand, I'll use it against that person because they messed me over, or because they, cheated me out of something, or because they took a place that I wanted, or because they made something difficult, or even, God forbid, as far as abuse or anything unhealthy and difficult and challenging. But Yosef's attitude and his mindset gives us an example to look up to and to emulate and to think to ourselves, well, how did Yosef manage to have a healthy, productive, and holy life, even after such challenges, the way he was able to find that balance in his life is because he didn't spend all of his time and all of his brain space obsessing over the people who made his life miserable. Instead, he focused on the fact that if God put me in this situation, and if God wants me to be here, then this is where I'm meant to be. And yes, my brothers should not have done that. But that's between them and God. I don't take the place of God. My life is between God and me. And what can I do in the position that I am in the life that I am in, to make it the best possible outcome for myself and for the people around me? And that's what Yosef teaches us by his response to his brothers, and the way that he handled the emotional reunion was because all he felt towards them was positivity. He wasn't harboring all of this negativity and all of this unhealthy desire for revenge and all of the toxic energy that would have come about if he was constantly thinking about how they made his life miserable. So just from the beginning of the Torah portion, from this reunion between Joseph and his brothers, we already see such a powerful lesson that we can really apply in our lives. Because maybe this doesn't apply to you, but I can certainly think of several people who make my life miserable. And we can focus on those people. And I don't have to tell you about those people, because you just have to think about the people in your life that make things challenging. It could be a neighbor, it could be a family member, it could be anybody. And the truth is that it's very easy to let their actions define our behavior. But it's so unhealthy, because it's not going to change their behavior. And again, if we can, in a healthy way, confront this person, have a discussion about the situation, or in a healthy way, disconnect ourselves and remove ourselves from the situation, that's an important thing to do as well. But most importantly, we cannot let, and we should not let, other people's negativity impact our ability to be positive in our situation. Let God handle their negativity and find the reason in our lives why we are in the place where we are and what God wants us to do in those moments. So that is the first encounter that we have in the Torah portion. Getting back to the story, Joseph and his brothers are now reunited. And like we said before, his first question is, Ha'od Avichai, is my father still alive? And the answer was yes. But Yaakov did not know truly that his son was alive. He had thought he was long dead, because the brothers had faked a bloody mess on his coat. Joseph had a very specific coat that had been given to him by his father as a sign of affection. And they actually took his coat, they slaughtered a goat, because a goat's blood is very similar to human blood. They dipped it in the blood, and then they brought the coat to Yaakov and said, do you recognize this? And Yaakov took it to understand that his son had been killed, had been attacked by a wild animal, and all that remained was his bloody coat, which was tragic. So Yaakov all this time was mourning the loss of his son. And now they have to break the news to him that his son is actually alive. And he's a king in Egypt. And he has a family. Yaakov has grandchildren that he has never met, which is the most exciting news, but also very, very shocking. Yaakov was already over 100 years old. He was an elderly man. And from past precedent, we know that Sarah, the first matriarch, Abraham's wife, actually passed away from the shocking news that her husband almost brought up their child, Yitzchak, as a sacrifice, which was in previous Torah portions. We discussed this on a previous class, and definitely a story worth looking up if you're not familiar with it. And Sarah actually passed away from that shocking news. So they were worried. How would they break the news to Yaakov without killing him? So they went back to Israel, back to the land of Canaan, and they went to seek counsel with one of the daughters of one of the tribes. So there were 12 tribes. Joseph is the king in Egypt. There are 11 other brothers. Asher is one of the brothers. And Asher had a daughter. Her name was Serach. And Serach was a very wise woman. And they went to her and they asked her if she can find a way to break the news to her grandfather gently, in a way that would not kill him and would also be gradual enough that he would be able to handle it in a healthy way. And the Torah tells us there are different midrashic explanations that describe the way she did it, but the most common explanation that's given, which is a very famous story, is actually that she used a very valuable tool. And the tool that she used was music. She actually took her harp, she was a harpist, and she started playing music softly. And as she played the music, she was starting to sing. And her grandfather, Yaakov, heard the music and was calmed by the beautiful melody. And she was started reciting poetic lyrics. And in her lyrics, she started hinting to, is Yosef in Egypt? Does Yosef have children, Ephraim and Manasseh, sitting at his knees? She slowly, gradually started introducing the idea that there's the possibility of Yosef being alive through song and through music. And through her music, Yaakov understood the message that she was trying to give him. But because it was in such a beautiful, calm, and gradual way, he was able to handle it, and he was able to experience the joy of finding out that his beloved long-lost son was in fact alive and a king in Egypt. But the news wasn't shocking, and it didn't kill him. And before we go any further, I want to do a little experiment. Now, we're going to try this, so you're going to have to give me a thumbs up or thumbs down or unmute yourself and let me know if you can actually hear this, okay? If you have a paper in front of you, you can jot it down. If not, you can write it in your phone or even just think about it, but it might be clearer for you if you do it on paper. I'm going to play a few seconds of a tune, and I want you to just write down what comes to mind when you hear this music. But it's going to be an experiment because I'm not sure if you're actually going to be able to hear the music through the computer. So hold on, let me see if I can connect the music. Actually, give me one second. All right. So just give me a thumbs up if you can hear this. All right. And I wasn't able to get Spotify on my computer, so we're going to have to work with me playing it from my phone. My apologies. All right. Do you hear anything?
Yes.
Okay. So if you can hear this music, perfect. Mark down. Hi, Anita. Hi, Perla.
Hi.
Mark down the first feeling that comes to mind when you hear this music. Just mark down the first feeling or thought that comes to mind when you hear this. All right, moving on now to the next one. Don't mark down the thought and feeling you have when you hear my 2-year-old crying, because I'm ignoring that. So next one. What comes to mind when you hear this tune? What feeling does it evoke?
Happiness.
Mark it down. We'll go through a few of them. All right, next one. The next one. And this is the next one. And this is the last one. All right, would anybody want to share what they marked down? Don't all answer at once, come on. Anybody want to share what any of the thoughts that came to mind for any of the music? Unmute yourself.
I think the first one sounded like something like a clock, like you're in a rush or something.
Okay, made you feel like you were in a rush. Okay.
Yeah, like had to go quickly. For the second one, it was like kind of like a dance, like happy melody. I didn't really get anything for the third one. The fourth kind of sounded like a train engine to me. I don't know why. Fifth was like, it was like reminded me of tranquility, like relaxing kind of. And the last was kind of like on the sad side maybe.
Okay.
I don't know.
Anita, you started commenting on one of them. What were your thoughts by any of the songs?
The first one, I felt like happiness, giving you a lot of life. The first one. The second one was something that was music that was full of life. Someone really that the person who wrote that music was felt full of life and wanted to show how much he loved life. The third one, I really didn't like it. Like it's a very hard job going on. The fourth one, it's full of sadness. That's what I felt. And the fifth one was very relaxing music.
Okay. Valentina, Crystal, anybody want to share anything else?
Okay, I'll confess, like my son and I, we came up with the following. But
Let's
like
hear.
the last one sounded a little bit like an Israeli soap opera.
Okay.
Like, the one before that it was like sad. So it was like, you know, maybe like what they would play when the prime minister dies or something on the news, you know. And the second one, it sounded like the Israeli, like when what plays right before the news.
Okay.
I know it's a
I
little
like it.
different than everybody's takes, but
No, that's exactly the point. So the beauty of music, and I just want to point out, one second. So none of these moments of music had any lyrics. Nobody was telling you how to feel. There were no words expressing any individual message. And yet, all the music evokes a feeling. Interestingly, by the way, I didn't play more than 10 seconds of any of them. So just a few seconds, we were able to experience a feeling from a little bit of music. Now, the feeling is not necessarily the same for everyone because everyone identifies with different music differently. Music is something that is extremely individual when it comes to a person's taste because it's so emotional and it connects with the feelings of a person on such an individual level. But what is it about music that allows us to feel something so deeply? What is it about music that automatically puts us in a certain mood? Nobody tells you when you hear a happy song, be happy. But the music just makes you feel that way. When you hear a sad song, nobody says you're going to feel sad. But the feeling of sadness can just be felt. So what is it about the music? I want to share with you a personal experience. It happened actually several weeks ago. When I was in high school, back when I had extra time, I used to write a lot of music. Now, I play music, I sing, and I wrote songs. I have folders of different lyrics that I wrote. And a few weeks ago, I was helping my niece, who is in 12th grade high school here, and she is the choir head of her school's performance. And I was helping her compose harmonies for the songs. And I went to a studio. We have like a small studio set up in the synagogue, and pulled out an old keyboard. I haven't had my hands on a keyboard in several years. And we were playing around, figuring out different harmonies. And it was honestly, it was a fun experience because I haven't done it in a while, and music is a passion of mine. And after we were finished our work, I sat down, I just started playing a few random songs. And without even realizing it, my fingers just started playing a song that I wrote in 9th grade. Now, granted, it's a very basic, not very professional song. There's no singer who's buying it from me, let's just say. But as soon as I started playing those notes, I immediately could feel all the feelings that I had, that I was experiencing when I wrote that song originally. Because the feelings that I had when I wrote that song became imbued in the melody, in the song itself. So the melody was able to evoke that feeling. Now, imagine an actual creative composer who writes a song and puts their essence into the music. What is it about music that has the power to evoke a certain feeling, a certain emotion? It's actually the feeling and the emotion that is put into the song when the song is being created. So the essence of the composer becomes part of the music, which allows you as a listener to feel that emotion and to connect with that composer. Now, Serach, understood that. She understood that by imbuing her music with a sense of calm, with a sense of tranquility, with a feeling of joy and peacefulness, she would be able to make her grandfather feel those emotions and therefore be able to absorb the shocking news that his son was alive in that emotional state, which is such a powerful thing. It is such a powerful tool that expressing feelings through music can actually have an effect on the listener's emotional state, which leads us to understand the power that music actually has in our own lives as well. Because when we listen to music, whether intentionally or just because we happen to hear about it, automatically we are connecting with the essence and the soul of the composer of that music. And that opens a door for that person's emotions to impact our emotions as well, which can be very beautiful, very powerful. But with every powerful tool, it can also be quite dangerous, which is why we have the power to choose what kind of music we would like to listen to. Now, everyone has their own standard of music. Everyone has their own taste in music. It's so individual. But I'm sure we can all think of certain music that you wouldn't want your kids listening to, or you maybe wouldn't listen to if you were listening on loudspeakers in a public place. Why is it that certain music isn't necessarily the best for our soul? Sometimes it's the lyrics, but that's not our discussion right now. Really, it's the essence and the character of the person who created that music. And when we listen to music that comes from a source that we would want to have an effect on our lives, we're making a choice to open up that channel. Valentina, let me know if your hand is raised by mistake or you actually have a question. And if you do have a question, I'll get to in 1 second.
I don't necessarily have a question, but I do have a comment. So
yes, please share.
I'm gonna try not to get a little emotional.
Okay. If you do, it's okay though, from our part.
My father is Holocaust survivor, and the one possession that he had was his violin. He was a beautiful violinist, and to this day, whenever I hear violin music, and that's like the one thing he was able to, when he moved to Venezuela, after everything, that's the one thing he got to keep.
Wow.
And to this day, whenever I hear the violin of any kind of sort, I just break down crying. I was pretty much raised by my grandparents, and my son actually, since he was really little, just picked up the violin like it was nothing. Like he could play it by ear. It was just the most astounding thing. So as a testament to the power of music, for sure.
That is,
and I
wow, that is so powerful.
So sorry.
No, that is so powerful. And the fact that even just expressing it brings up such emotion is in itself a testament to the fact that music touches us on such a deep level, not just because of the music that we're listening to, but because of the source of where that emotion comes from. And, we don't often think about who's the composer, who's the writer of this music, where's this music coming from? But the truth is that when we do focus on Is this an emotion? Is this a mood? Is this a feeling that I want to have in my day, in my life, and affecting my soul? We can choose to listen to music that puts us in a good place. So, there's music for every occasion. Sometimes we want more somber music, more reflective music. Sometimes we want peaceful music, calming music. Sometimes we want happy, cheerful music, depending on the mood and the feeling that we're trying to evoke. But the idea that the story behind the music can create and evoke such emotion and such feeling is something that is so powerful. It's like when you are standing at the counter in Sephora or wherever you buy your makeup, whether it's Walgreens, Sephora, or anywhere else, and you're choosing what color bronzer you want to buy. You're deciding what color you want your face to be. Do you want to have a blush pink look? Then you're going to choose that color. Do you want to have a tan bronzy look? Then you're going to go for a different color. But you're choosing what color you want to paint yourself, to use that term, in order to look a certain way. When we listen to music, we are choosing which emotion do we want to paint ourselves with right now? Because the music that we listen to impacts us on such a deep level, whether we know it or not. And the proof of that is, anybody here ever had a song stuck in your head? And it's just in your head and you can't get it out of your head? And sometimes it's a song that you didn't even choose to listen to. It's just something that was playing in the background at work or in a store when you were shopping, and all of a sudden you find yourself singing it over and over, or somebody else was singing it, and it's just stuck in your head. What is it? Nobody gets stories stuck in their head. That it's just playing subconsciously in your brain. Only music has that power to become so part of you without even realizing, and truly affect you. And we see this from the Torah. We see in the Torah that Sarah recognized the power of music and therefore used the emotional state of her music to transfer that emotional feeling onto her grandfather in order to tell him that Yosef was alive. That is something that we make the choice to do every single day when we listen to music. And what made me really think about this idea so deeply, I don't know if any of you here are on Spotify, but if you are, then you know what I mean when you say that you're getting notifications of your Spotify Wrapped, right? And your Spotify history for the year is coming up. Which songs you listen to, what mood was your basic, the trend of your mood. And sometimes it's quite what you were hoping for, and sometimes you might even be surprised by it. Was your Spotify Wrapped, were your top songs the feeling of calm? Was it the feeling of rock and roll? Was it dance? Was it wistful? Was it charming? Whatever your Spotify is telling you. Why are there emotions? Because music brings emotion. So when we listen to music, we need to remember, where is this music coming from? Who is coming from? What are the morals and values of the person who created that music? Because those values and morals, without us even choosing necessarily, will begin to impact our own lives. In Judaism, specifically in Hasidic thought, the concept of a nigun, which is the Hebrew word for a tune, a melody, is a very powerful thing. And listening to a Jewish nigun, or even more profoundly, a Hasidic nigun, that comes from a tzaddik, a righteous man, a holy man, has the power to transform our souls. In fact, a Jewish melody, a Hasidic melody that comes from a great rabbi, has the power to actually change a person's life. You know, many Hasidic masters, great rabbis who were steeped in Torah knowledge, are known for their music, which you would think like we should know them for their contributions to Torah study and the books that they wrote. But no, besides for all of that, there are so many Hasidic melodies. Why are these rabbis composing music? And why do we want to listen to music that's composed by these rabbis? The reason is because music comes from a place within, deep within a person's soul. And when we listen to music that comes from the soul of a holy person, a holy man, a holy woman, their holiness, their spirituality can become imbued in our own life as well, and can have an effect on our own life as well. Tonight and tomorrow, because on the Jewish calendar, every day starts the evening before, is actually a very joyous day on the Chabad calendar. And going back several decades, and if you know me, you know numbers are not my strong suit, so I'm not going to say a number that's wrong. But going back, I want to say about 30, between 30 and 40 years. I could be so off. It could be 50, it could be 20. I'm really not good at numbers. No, it's not 20. Between 30 and 40 years ago, there was a court case taking place in New York with the Lubavitcher Rebbe to determine the ownership of his library. This library had been belonging to the Chabad community organization and the Rebbe, and there was a descendant of the Rebbe's family from the previous Rebbe who was arguing that the library was actually a personal possession, and therefore should be split evenly among the children, or it should belong to him. And the Rebbe's stance was that the library belongs to the Rebbe, and therefore the entire Chabad community and the Hasidim, the followers, and has to stay within 770, the Rebbe's library. And it was a very stressful time in the Chabad community. And tonight and tomorrow, on the 5th of Tevet, was the day when the courts ruled in favor of the Rebbe, stating that the library belongs to the Rebbe, belongs to the Hasidim, the followers of the Rebbe, which is a very joyous celebration, because it represents on a spiritual level the fact that a leader, a Rebbe, is more than just an individual person, but rather the leader of each individual person on a soul level. But we can get into that a different time. But the point that I want to bring out is that leading up to the court case, there was a very joyous melody that was being sung by the Hasidim, by the followers in the Chabad community, which is the song of Didan Natzach. And it's a very joyous melody, and it's a very beautiful melody. And it's a victorious march. But what's interesting is that the Hasidim were singing this song not after the court case ruled in their favor as a celebration, but actually before. So why were they singing the words Didan Natzach, we were victorious, we are victorious, with this victory melody, this triumphant celebration song, when there was nothing yet to celebrate? Why were they singing before?
To bring
Because they were creating. Anita, what were you saying?
is to for them to win.
Exactly. Because the melody itself brings about the experience of what the melody is trying to convey. The song itself helped bring about the victory. Because when we sing in celebration, it connects us on such a deep emotional level to the feeling of celebration, which in turn helps us feel faith in God that we will have what to celebrate. And that brings about the actual event that we are celebrating. So the melody that we listen and we hear and we absorb brings us into that frame of mind. There's a story that is told by one of the Hasidic Rebbes. And he was called the Mittler Rebbe. He was the second of the Chabad rabbis. And he was actually known for his strong affinity to music. In fact, he often had a group of his students who would form a choir and sing many of the melodies. And it was anytime there was a holy day, a celebration, the group of students would gather, and his own son was actually part of the choir. And sometimes they would even put on a whole performance. They would ride horses while they would sing Chabad melodies. And it was a random day, and the Rebbe suddenly called the choir and told them to come perform in the courtyard outside the synagogue. And everyone's like, well, what are we celebrating? But nobody knew, but they followed the instructions of their leader, and the choir began singing. They were mounted on their horses. They were singing joyful Hasidic melodies. And all of a sudden, the Rebbe's son, who was part of the choir, fell off the horse. And he was actually lying on the ground, not moving. So everyone stopped singing. Obviously, they were ready to rush over and see if he's okay. He didn't seem like he had survived the fall. And the Rebbe motioned for them to keep on singing. And his own son is lying on the ground, not moving, seemingly not alive, possibly. They didn't know what was going on because they didn't go over. The Rebbe's telling them, keep on singing, keep on singing. And they sang song after song after song. And then finally the Rebbe told them stop. And they went to see if he was okay. They revived him. And all he had was a broken leg. Now, when this experience was over, everyone was very confused. What happened here? First of all, why did the Rebbe call a choir and a performance on a random day? Second of all, how could they just keep on singing while his own son is lying on the ground? And what was the meaning behind all of this? And the meaning actually was, which the Rebbe explained to them, was that the Rebbe, a very holy and saintly man with divine spirit, he was able to sense from a spiritual sensitivity that his son would not survive that day. And there was nothing that he, as a righteous tzaddik, a holy man, could do to stop this decree that was threatening his son's life. And the only tool that had the power to give his son life was the power of the Hasidic melodies. So when his son fell off the horse, the Hasidic melodies that they were singing were actually saving his life. And his leg that was broken was just a very minor injury in comparison to the death that could have happened that day. Now, this story seems very lofty, and it seems very, difficult to understand and relate to for us in our daily lives. But the idea that a melody that comes from a holy place has the power to create holy outcomes is something that we see from here in this Torah portion. And many, many other cases in Jewish history. We know that King David composed music, and he sang and played on his harp. And it was with music that he wrote the book of Tehillim. Mm-hmm. And every single person has a time in their life where they pick up a book of Tehillim, a book of Psalms, whether it's to pray for someone who is suffering, to thank God for a joyous occasion. But Tehillim, the book of Psalms, is the sidekick of every Jewish soul. At some point, we should always be saying Tehillim, but at some point or another, we always have that urge, or we should have that urge to want to say Tehillim. What is it about Psalms, other than any other book in the Torah, that evokes feeling? It's because it was composed with music. It's actually a song. It was composed with a melody, and King David imbued his emotion into the book of Tehillim so that we can access that emotion and use it in our prayer to strengthen our own connection with God. So the power of the source of our music that we listen to and that we take in is so important and so valuable. Now, my goal tonight is not for you to change your Spotify playlists. The goal that we need to walk away with, that I hope that we walk away with, is that when we listen to music, let's try to make it music that has a positive effect on our own souls. If anybody wants Hasidic playlists, I'm happy to share them with you. Jewish playlists, I'm happy to share them. There are many on Spotify. And by the way, Spotify is not sponsoring tonight's class, even though it's starting to sound like it. But the idea of holy music is to choose which source, which creative spirit do we want to have an effect on our own spirits? Because once we open that door, the effect happens on our souls, whether we feel it subconsciously or whether we feel it consciously. It's there. Once we listen to music that comes from a source that is impure or unholy or immoral, that has an effect on us, whether we choose it or not, because it comes from that deep source. And when we choose to listen to music that comes from holy places, Jewish people who are writing music as a way to express their connection to God, automatically our soul feels that connection and wants to experience that feeling as well. So ladies, this week's Torah portion teaches us many beautiful things. But tonight we really can focus on what we allow to impact our own souls. From Yosef, we learn that we don't want to let negative people impact the life we choose to live. Like we spoke about from his brothers. His brothers made his life miserable. But when he had the chance to get back at them, he didn't even have that feeling of wanting to take revenge, because in his mind, everything that happens comes from God. And negative people and negative experiences that are caused by people who make my life miserable will not define my mood, my choices, my way of life. The first thing, a healthy way of affecting our souls, is let God take care of the difficult people for me, and not let those negative people, in fact, impact our own lives. And the second thing, which we learned from Sarah and her music, which she used to express the emotion to her grandfather in a way that saved his life and allowed him to hear the beautiful news of his son's existence when he wasn't actually dead, is that the music that we choose to listen to, and more importantly, the source of the music that we choose to listen to, has such a deep effect on our own souls and our own moods and our spirit and our disposition. Let's make it the right choice. Let's make it something that we want to be painted that color. Let's make it something that we want to live on that mindset and live in that mood and with that environment, the beat that we want to be playing. So when we listen to music, let's think, is this music that's helping me, or is it music that's harming me? Because music does something, whether we choose it or not. So let's make the good choice. So on that note, thank you everyone for joining. And for those of you who came in the middle of the class, I did record from the beginning. You're more than welcome to go back and listen to the beginning at a later point. If anybody has any questions or anything they want to share, please unmute yourself.